My name is Greg Welch. I am, I guess, sort of the master of ceremonies today. The panel with several of us here today. I'll introduce them in just a moment. And if this title does not match your expectation for what the panel is, you're in the wrong place. Otherwise, welcome. So my co-panelists today are, as you can see here on the screen, Tabitha Peck, who's here, Valerie Jones-Taylor is here, Gerd Bruder, and Jeremy is on his way here. On the right, you see we have also Ryan Schubert, who's helping out, and Dr. Nahal Naruzi is helping out also, and she's very involved. The two of them are very involved in a lot of the thinking for this. So they're going to be helping out throughout, facilitating discussion, taking some notes. And just so everyone knows, this is being recorded. And I don't know what VR's purposes are, but our purposes are to capture anything we can that people say. If anybody has an issue with anything, needs to talk, needs for me to stop, somebody wave their hands visibly or try and send me a chat. Good luck with that. All right, so why are we here today? We're going to tell you about this thing we call VERA, and I'll explain what it is in a moment here. So we want to just share the basic idea, what we're thinking about right now, why we were thinking about it, why are we doing it, how might it exist? We don't know for sure because this is speculative. We're planning it, I should say, it's completely speculative. And then we want to keep this first part short, and then we want to have a lot of time for discussion at the end here. The majority of the time today we want to spend for discussion, and that's why this Zoom session is wide open. It's because we really wanted people to be able to speak up, raise their hands, talk without us having to throttle anybody. So we're hoping that that will work, and if it doesn't, we'll figure it out. So today is just part of an ongoing conversation. We had a similar session at ISMAR. Some of you might have been there. It was really great. We got some great feedback. We're going to have some other public sessions that are not associated with a conference, and we'll be sending those invitations out via mail lists soon. April 6th of April, at least in the US, we'll have a morning and then an afternoon. So we're hoping to hit all parts of the world reasonably well. All right, so why are we here? What are we doing? We are looking at, so I'm going to move the Zoom banner if I can. We are looking at a research proposal, or a proposal to the US National Science Foundation. And it's a relatively large amount of money for proposals for the United States. It's a limit, the top end is like $5 million US over 3 to 5 years, something like that. And so what's really special about this grant that we're proposing, and why are we here talking to you guys about it? Because it's not a grant for us. It is not a grant really for the investigators or the people involved here organizing it. This is a grant, our intent and our vision for this is it's a grant for the whole VR or XR community, which means all of you and researchers who work in this field. So this is special because it's not a research grant. That's, as it says there in the second bullet. So we are not being given money. In fact, we're prohibited from using the money to actually do research per se. Instead, the money is for infrastructure, which an easy example of that would be like, think of a supercomputer. If we were to buy a supercomputer or some fantastic machine and put it in our lab and make it available to everybody in the world, that's a good way to think about it. So we'd set up accounts and people could log in, they could use it and do stuff. So we're thinking about is something like a machine like that. I'll explain here in a minute. Our proposal deadline is June 23rd. So we've been working on this for quite some time, having lots of conversations with people, thinking a lot, iterating on stuff, but we're still formulating the ideas, and we really need, and I mean need, sort of the buy-in from the community, because this makes no sense. Believe me, those of us who are organizing it, we really would almost be just as happy if someone just took it away and we didn't do it. But we're doing it because we really think the community would benefit from it, and we think it would improve our science, and so we're and do lots of good things and help a lot of people who maybe can't do some of the research related things, user studies that we're hope to enable. So this is, like I said, for you guys, this is for the community. So what is it? What we're thinking about, I said machine a moment ago, like a supercomputer. So what we're envisioning is something like a Mechanical Turk resource for the XR community. So VERA in the middle there, that is the Mechanical Turk resource, but it's for running human subject research. So in the center, VERA, and around us is the whole community. Again, you guys and researchers involved. For the moment, we're thinking, the way we're planning on doing this is a curated, so we would say a curated subject pool. That means that we're intentionally picking people. So we're looking for people with very broad demographics, and we would attempt to keep those people over a long period of time, actually over several years, 3 to 4 years, something like that. We were originally thinking, we'll talk about this a little bit, I think, in a little bit here, but we were originally thinking about, and we still are thinking about, shipping head mounts to certain people. So identifying subjects around, it's probably, I think, has to be the US, but sending them broadly out to people. But we're also looking at using existing companies and resources like YouGov and Prolific, who provide human subjects. And we're trying to see if we can make that work so that we can use people who already have HMDs, which is a pretty large, obviously, base. So we got, I think, some numbers on some of those things later. So the idea is VERA would sit here and take in proposals for research studies from the community. And we'll talk a little bit about near the end. That's part of our discussion, is how might that look. We'll push those studies, we'll vet the studies, and then push them out to our pool. Our pool will run, the subject will run the experiments, we'll get back the data as quickly as we can, and then make the data available to the researchers. And the idea is that it would eventually be available widely to the community once the researchers have had their opportunity to do what they need to do to publish or whatever. And we could also just do basic surveys. So these would be VR users. So it could be everything from as significant as people doing a VR experience. So the subjects might be in their living room, head mount on, doing some stuff, or it could be as small as them sitting at a computer just answering some survey questions that are appropriate for research for VR people. So why are we doing this? So it's several people we've talked to over the years have expressed a need for this or really love the idea. So we still like the idea. We've been working on it for a while, and we still like the idea. We're not aware of anything that does exactly this. There are some things that do close to this or similar or related, and we're leveraging those in every way. Some of you will mention, I think we may mention here later, I don't remember, PSA, the Psychology Science Accelerator. You may have heard of this, a very large organization, and the director of the organization, we're working with him also, and he will likely be a part of our team. So we're trying to get as much help and insight from others who've done similar things as we can. So why are we going to do this? So more experimental data, larger N, and Professor Gerd Bruder is going to talk about that in a little bit. Better experimental data, more diverse, controlled, and Professors Tabitha Peck and Valerie Jones-Taylor, Professor Valerie Jones-Taylor are going to talk about that in a little bit. Maybe replicability, repeating things, and even longitudinal studies. So looking over multiple years, either with the same individuals, it's possible, or with other individuals, but just as time passes and things change and capabilities change. So the idea here is that you'd have a trusted participant pool. It would be reliable. There's some trade-offs there, because those subjects would become more experienced or perhaps be experienced, which might be different than what we all kind of look for now, which are inexperienced subjects typically is what we're looking for. We could talk the rationale about that a little while, but it is a trade-off, and we're certainly aware of that, and it is something we're thinking about, and we'd love to have your thinking about it at some point too. So improved logistics. So most of us are going to do a study. You have to build everything up, get everything ready, get the lab, get everything all set. Of course, there's a software development side, which won't go away. You have to develop your study. But especially for those people who have difficulty or really unable to run studies, unable in air quotes, is just not practical for them. This resource could be used by them to allow them to do, turn a crank and do some studies. So I want to turn it over to Gerd for a minute, Professor Bruder, to say a little bit about the big N motivation.
Thank you, Greg. So I'll try to keep it short. I don't think we have to convince you too much that we need more experimental data in XR, including higher numbers of participants, repeated trials, and more longitudinal data. However, big N is about more than numbers. It's about how it can help our field cover new grounds or do it faster. So I've been a program chair for IEEE VR for the last 3 years, and I noticed a few patterns in our field. For instance, I noticed that one of the main reasons for rejection at this conference are underpowered studies, right? Underpowered user studies. Not that the ideas were bad, but that they were tested with just too few samples. And most of you will know that power analysis allows you to estimate what sample size you need to get this precious p-value below 0.05. On the right side, you can see one of Jacob Cohen's famous tables where he plotted effect size against power to compute the required n for those studies. And if I think back at what has been published in our field and what the submissions were that we got in this field, we can see that our field is mainly covering the upper right corner of that table, where the sample sizes are rather small and the effect sizes are rather high. Pushing forward towards larger samples, I think, is one of the next frontiers of our field. Not only concentrate on the effects that are the easiest to show, but try to understand the more subtle differences that really require bigger N in this field. Now, a similar argument can be made about more diverse populations. Next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Tabitha and Valerie.
Thank you, Gerd. So one thing is that, yes, I think everybody's kind of on board that we absolutely need larger participant populations that we're running our studies with, bigger N. But within that, we need to also be considering what N are we pulling in? So what participants are we really looking at? And making sure that we're actually considering more identity dimensions. So currently many identity dimensions are not recognized. Yeah, there we go. There's work that has shown that this has led to biased research. So here's one example where women have been underrepresented at IEEE VERA in terms of our participant population. And this led to biased results in that if you look at the results of simulator sickness in studies, the proportion of women that were in the study actually affected the simulator sickness results. And so if we have more diverse populations, we'd actually have, we're going to have more generalizable results overall. Sorry, I don't actually have control over the slides. Valerie, would you like to?
So also what we've come to see in some of our research is that individuals from different racial and ethnic backgrounds will experience VR or the interactions and the activities, different things that they're doing in the metaverse quite differently, particularly if they are engaging with other avatars, people, etc. in these domains. So it's really important to sort of consider these perspectives when we are designing our research and when we are analyzing our data. And importantly, next point, when we want to think about generalizing the findings that we have to the larger population. So if our goal is to make claims about processes and other things for the general population, we really need to be more diligent about collecting data from a larger array of people in that population as well.
Fabulous, thanks guys. And so we're going to come back to this. This is one of the discussion topics at the end when we finish the basic introduction here. So a couple of things to keep in mind just as we go forward here discussing the, and I'm going to present a little more about what VERA we envisioned it to be, but keep this in mind. It's probably 4 years is what we're looking at right now. It's 3 to 5 years, and we're looking at 4 at the moment. That's what we're budgeting for and thinking about a long way. So the first year will take us some time to kind of get things up and ramped up and run for 3.5 years. And then the vision of NSF is that the research infrastructure would then be self-sustaining after that. So that's one of our tasks, is to think about how do we plan that? How do we go forward to try and make that happen? This whole effort, this 4-year effort by us, we're considering it a prototype. So we're trying to make it as good as we can, but we're not going to get it right the first time. So it's going to evolve over the 4 years, and it's a prototype. So we're going to see, hopefully we won't throw it away, but you know, at the end, we'll know a lot more, and whoever or however this gets picked up, if it does, to continue on, we'll have learned from it. So we're not trying to overburden it by making it too perfect. So we're generally trying to think about in terms of the submission of studies, carrying them out, getting the data back as best we can to keep things simple and relatively homogeneous, because every variation for all these things is just going to complicate everything for everybody, at least certainly during this prototype phase. You know, we can, if things are going well and we think we can manage it, we can expand and do other things. There are some exceptions in the beginning. We're thinking of some other things. As I said earlier, have lots of discussion with a lot of other people. I won't give you all the details, but several different organizations, lots of companies, other researchers. Last thing on this point, keep in mind, and you'll see this in a moment, this is, we think of ourselves as the investigators as like the stewards or shepherds of this and the coordinators. We're trying to build it, put it in place. We think largely of the funds that would come from the National Science Foundation as funds that belong to all of us. And we see part of our job as to make sure those funds are spent wisely to benefit as many people as we can and to benefit the research and the individuals. So that means that we see running this, and NSF requires running this, be partly the responsibility, in fact, largely the responsibility of the community, which means largely you guys. So there are more than opportunities to participate. There really are requirements if this is going to function the way it's supposed to function. So I mentioned this before, no surprise here, back and forth, proposals get ingested, work gets done, results go back out to the community. One thing we've wondered about are shown here at the edge that you might wonder, well, gee, can we do studies with psychologists and doctors and nurses and, you know, other people, teachers. So NSF is very, very specific about, very clear about you wanting to define a community. And so our community is going to be the XR community. But of course, all of us XR researchers, many of us work with people outside this community. So we think of it as there are people on the edge within the XR community who would sort of interface with those external partners. So they will be involved, and that'll enrich in our research. Those domain interface experts, we envision we might even have, like on a website or something, somehow made available a list of people who like to collaborate with, you know, people in entertainment, healthcare, education, and so forth. And so people outside of our community would have a place to start. They could go to, you know, Professor Rob Linneman and you know, send him a note and hook up and try to see if there's something they could do together if they have some ideas. So we're trying to provide pathways for those people to use the resource indirectly through our community. So the systems, the way we see this working, again, it's sort of like a machine. So we imagine that we have some deployed headsets out to some people who did not have headsets to begin with. And then we also imagine community or population with existing headsets. People already have them. Again, trade-offs between these two things, obviously. I will say that one thing we've thought about in terms of experienced users is that, and you could call this rationalization, but we're trying to think about this, that in the future, of course, we all expect that VR is being used by everyone. It's being used pretty widely by people. So people are going to be experienced. They're not going to be naive. And so maybe there are circumstances where it makes sense or is okay having people as your subjects who are to some degree experienced, maybe not experts, but they have some experience. We've thought about some special case populations, and that's still something we're thinking about. As I said earlier, it's a little hard for us to think about initially because of the complexity. So repositories of data, maybe the applications, the study designs, things like that. And then you would be able to, investigators or researchers would be able to access the resource, like have a dashboard where they could see where their study is at the moment, you know, how the data is collected, what's the status of things in terms of being reviewed or actually executing, and those sorts of things. So who would be involved? Of course, there are all of the grant PIs, the collection of us here on the panel speaking with you today. We would hire, this is part of the money would go explicitly to individuals who would work solely on this project. Their job full-time would be to run this, make it work with the subject populations, work with the researchers. There's one aspect of that in particular that NSF is very, very, very specific about, and it's a good thing, but they're very explicit about it, is outreach. Outreach in this sense is not, in this case, is not outreach in the sense that many of us might be used to it. It's not just that, but it is really outreach to the community. It's working with the community to make them aware of the resource, teach them how to use it, get their feedback. And so it's really trying to cross that bridge very actively, making an effort to try and cross that bridge between the community and the resource. We each would have, researchers would likely have their own institutional review boards who would approve their studies. We would probably have a separate institutional review board that would be for the subject population. All right, so you guys then, the XR community, how do you fit in? Well, as I said, there are the domain-specific communities like educators and medical professionals. There are the domain interface experts who bridge between our community and those guys. There will be at least an advisor. There will be several boards. Okay, and there's one that will be an advisory board, standing board probably, that will be people from our community who will monitor what's going on with the resource over the years, maybe rotate in and out, trying to make sure that we're doing good things. People who are monitoring the specific operations, the individuals, the processes, things like that. We will then have, this will be like you guys essentially, researchers, I should say. You guys might be in the operations board, might be in the advisory board, but also would be submitting proposals. So every researcher would work with the vision is every researcher would work with their own IRB to get their studies approved. They would submit them to the VERA in the following way. So this is an example. Okay, this is just an example, a concrete example. This is not the be all end all. And this is one of the things we really want to get feedback from. And we will not know it for sure when we submit the proposal, right? This is one of the things we'll have to really iron out in the first year when we get funded. But here's an example of how it could work. Okay, so the researchers, you submit something that is maybe even preliminary. It might almost be like an abstract submission for paper. We're not sure exactly what it would contain, but certain information that would allow the board, which is you guys, to evaluate the proposed study enough to encourage the researchers to go forward with a full study or a full proposal, as opposed to wasting a lot of time doing a full proposal only to find out later it's not matched to the resource or something like that. So kind of iterating as quickly as we can to get it into impedance matched to the resource. Then study gets run, it gets reviewed by the operations board, and then the study gets run and the research results come back. And go back to the researchers and, like I said earlier, eventually to the community. At the moment, and really within the past 2 weeks to month, we've been thinking more about the potential for different classes of studies. So there could be small ones which might be processed and done more quickly, might be reviewed and done more quickly, medium ones, obviously a little longer, and then very large ones. This could be very large N, could be large over time. Sort of study. So those obviously might take a little longer to get right. And why do we care about getting it right? We care because this money from the National Science Foundation, if we get it, is, as we said, it belongs to all of us. And so we don't want to inadvertently misspend it on something. I mean, that's going to happen, but we're going to try and avoid that as best we can. We have to balance being able to ingest and take proposals and push them through as quickly as we can with not accidentally spending the resources, paying the human subjects, all of that on something that in retrospect, we all would have preferred had been done differently. So we'll do our best. Again, it'll be the community resource. It will be, it's for you guys, not for us. Be operated by the XR community. So we're thinking about, we're going to arrive at one idea for how this will all go forward. Again, it's no claim of the best, and it'll be refined if we are so lucky as to be funded. Then we as a community will work together to try and refine this, get it right as best we can. If you're interested and willing to contribute ideas, we can't, unfortunately, probably cannot take people's names and put them down. There's some sort of legalities in some sense with the National Science Foundation there, but there are some exceptions. So if you're really excited about the ideas here after you leave here, or you think about it for a little bit and you'd like to be involved in some way, just reach out, let us know, and we'll see what we can, we'd love to have help. So, all right, so again, 6th of April, 2 sessions, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll be sending these out later, but there's one in the morning in the East Coast of the US, and then one in the afternoon in the East Coast of the US. And it'll be just like this. It's gonna be 90 minutes, short presentation, and then a bunch of discussion. All right, with that, I'm gonna kick it off to discussion topics. We have 1 hour left in this session. So we're roughly thinking 20 to 25 minutes for the first 2 topics. And then the last topic, we will probably not need quite as much time for. We just want to get people thinking about it. So let me kick it over to, unless somebody has a really, question that just can't wait, I'd like to hand it off to Valerie and Tabitha to start the discussion about opportunities to foster diversity. And then we'll transition to the second topic with Nahal. At some point, I'll do that, and then Jeremy. Valerie and Tabitha, sound okay?
Yes. So here we just compiled a series of questions that we wanted to open up to the community as we think about increasing diversity and having a wider participant pool for research in this community. And so here you can see some of the questions listed. We kind of wanted to just open it up, and Tabitha, you may have some additional thoughts to add here, but you can see we're just wanting to know, where do you think we may need improvement? Who has been excluded? And other questions about how we might be able to encourage people to actually care about increasing diversity in their samples, et cetera.
By the way, sorry, Valerie, I'm going to leave the slide up at least for a little bit so that everybody can see these points and be thinking about it. If it makes sense at some point, I can switch it off and we can see each other bigger.
Nope, that makes sense. Thank you.
Maybe real quickly, could I address a question from Rob? I think it's important that everybody understand that. So Rob asked, and this is a very good question, with the large number of non-US based researchers here, can you talk a little bit about opportunities for non-US researchers? And I apologize, that was in the presentation originally, but I tried to get the presentation down short, so that went by the wayside. The short of it is they're going to be involved. International research is going to be involved in one way, shape, or form. The legality or important part of it is that the money is from the U.S. National Science Foundation, and we believe, we haven't yet been able to get an answer, can probably only go to activities that involve U.S. researchers. We don't know that for sure, but that's a pretty safe bet. But obviously, U.S. researchers can collaborate with anybody around the world they want. And so people from around the world could certainly be parts of studies for sure with a U.S. partner. I can't imagine that would not work. There might even be a way we can do it just with investigators from around the world. We just don't know. We're trying to figure that out. We want to, we're just not sure what we can do. Certainly international researchers can be parts of the boards, be parts of the operations as much as possible. Sorry, Valerie and Tabitha, hang on one second. There are a couple other questions here that I think are probably important to address. So Gudrun, thank you, Gudrun. How many test persons do you plan to have in your database, order of magnitude? So to give you an idea, right now in Prolific, which is one of the big companies that does human subject research participant curating, there are there are over 8,000 people in their pool of subjects right now who have HMDs. We don't know what types of HMDs, and within those populations, there are roughly half men, half women, and lots of other diverse breakdowns. But in total, people who have HMDs, it's over 8,000. So it's a big number. Now, we wouldn't be running a study with 8,000 people. That would be cost prohibitive, but they could be very large. I think the other questions I'm going to leave for the moment. I'll continue to look at them. So Vicky just asked, Vicky, the participant pool will be able to include international folks or just US? We don't know. Prolific, for example, their population is UK based and US based. That's just the way they are right now. That's their company. And so if we went through them, that would be perhaps the largest pool would be from those two countries, but we also could curate to other places. I think it largely comes down a lot of logistical stuff. If we're managing it from the US and we have to interact with the participants, it's going to be tough. So I don't know. It could be something that evolves over time. All right, so I'm going to keep looking at the questions and I'll try to cue them up in my head or paper, but I want to go back to Valerie and Tabitha and to carry on this other discussion.
Yeah, so there are some very, very good and helpful questions in the chat. And I will say that there are some things we have talked about, but I'll let Greg address them. So I'll say an activity that I actually do in my class is going to require everybody to use the chat. So what I'm going to encourage right now, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to pause and make you think and answer and contribute. You can either post into the chat or post into Discord. So I don't care which one, because we'll try to save both. But I want everybody to pause for a moment and think about answering this first question. of which dimensions have been excluded from research. And so I want everybody to think of 1 or 2 dimensions, and I want you to type them out, but don't hit enter yet, so that it gives everybody a chance to think about them. Because I'm really wondering what's going to happen in terms of, are we going to see some repeats from people? And I think that'll kind of help us guide how to which dimensions that we really need to focus on. And hint, if you're done with yours, start thinking about the second question.
And I want to add that the reason why this question is so important is because it could be that we can't get every possible dimension, but we'll really need to focus on a few that are more quote unquote important for groups or for people, something like that, to be able to actually meet the need. So it'll be important for us to know what are on people's minds.
All right, I love that I'm seeing several people typing. Everyone go ahead and hit enter. And if you're still typing, keep going. And so we are data people. So we are collecting this data right now as to what the community hasn't seen and what the community wants to see. And I'm also going to mention what Greg had mentioned earlier, which is this Zoom session is actually quite open. And so if somebody wants to say something, they are allowed to go ahead and they can raise their hand. I think you can even unmute yourself and share something as well.
If I can't unmute, we can. I just
okay. I don't know. You're in control.
I can unmute myself.
Ah, there you go. And so Valerie, is there another one of these questions that you'd like to promote to the top? Since I know we are going to run out of time. And I love that these comments are still coming in. So thank you, everybody.
The third one, the third bullet point, I think is important as well.
Yeah. So yeah, how do we cultivate a participant base that cannot afford and/or access VR, AR, XR hardware and software? And that's something that was kind of mentioned in the Discord channel. It was asked a little bit. Has anyone done any work looking specifically at reaching this population? I think there's actually quite a bit of conversation going on, even though we're not saying anything. So I keep the comments coming, because like I said, we're going to try and save these. One thing that I would like to ask the community, because this is something that we can directly control, is how do we actually foster a community where we place a greater weight and greater emphasis on participant population diversity? People are typing instead of talking.
I think that point, sorry, I'm jumping in, Greg, here, the point that Tabitha just asked, that fourth point of Valerie and Tabitha's here, is, to me, is super important, because it's really, as I said earlier at the very beginning, it's one of the two biggest advantages, if you will, pros of something big like this machine, big N, and diversity. And so if diversity is not important, and I don't mean it's unimportant, but if it's not sort of tantamount or in the forefront of people's minds in terms of researchers, then that value is less valuable, and that attribute is less valuable. So our presumption is that it is very, 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 very valuable. So the question is, how do we encourage the community to require that, if you will, or encourage that in their research, assuming you think it's a good thing to do?
There are a few people who are asking about the ability to unmute. So Andreas,
Yeah, I can unmute.
Can you hear me?
It may seem to be related to where you are.
Whoever just said, "Can you hear me?" The answer is yes. I don't know who said that.
Okay. I can hear me. Oh, I have an idea. Okay.
I think I just unmuted myself. If you can hear me.
yes, we can.
Can I speak?
Please.
Yeah, fine. Yes, I am a professor in Peru, and I think I am the ethic chair of an XR Latam group, as something which is quite relevant for me is inclusion and diversity, inclusivity, also affordability. Last week I had a lecture about this. Half of the world has an internet. Most of it has it bad and slow and expensive. So if we want to broaden the community and make the metaverse accessible for everyone and so on and all that stuff, we need to foster the development for low tech and low connectivity. Not only low tech, so with low tech I mean mainly what people have, cell phones, not only head-mounted displays, and low tech headphones. In Africa, to buy the cheapest headphone costs 70% of your monthly income. In Malawi, to have this chat 1 hour Zoom is 15% of your monthly income. So what I see is in the first world, there's an oblivion of the difference in the world, and that's not good to foster as a development of the XR community. So consider that to develop. Also for me, the most affordable headset is 24 times less affordable. So consider, if you want to foster the community to well, I don't see it, but yes, to develop also for, because that's the future. So the user will come from there. And if there's somebody, someday the stuff is getting cheaper, okay, head-mounted displays are getting cheaper. And someday will be affordable for the people who can't pay it now. But if you study with the people who can't pay it now, in which future are you looking at? So try to develop it to affordable stuff, and also for non-good. If you see the map of the speed and broadband, you see that very little countries controls the broadband. So
yeah, so Andreas, I think sorry to cut you off, but we do have we want to hear from lots of people. But I think your points about you know, how to reach you know, different socioeconomic status, looking at internet, these are all things that we are aware of and we are talking about, and so it's great and it's very helpful to hear it from all of you as well, that these are things of importance to the community. So, and I'm so glad you're enthusiastic. Is there anyone else? So I'm Valerie, are you doing any monitoring of?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think Pablo in the hall responded. It was originally noted that the size would be smaller, but as Nahal noted in the chat, we really are excited about getting that sample size up. So using sources such as Prolific. So we will begin conversations with them to see what is possible. But we still know that, as was just brought up, the issue with socioeconomic status and access, we may have to mail headsets out to certain people, how to get them in the community, how to maintain their access in the community. When things go wrong, if they are not an experienced user, will they still be able to remain in the community? What sort of support might we need to ensure that they can continue to be there if this is important for us? So these are some of the questions that we have, but of course, Prolific or another support would be a great place potentially for us to start, to have a larger base to begin with that we can build on and use our money more effectively to target some of the lower socioeconomic groups, things like that. Pablo, I see your hand up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, handling equipment is always a risk, I guess, more in some countries than others. But what I guess it depends on the project and the type of study that we want to do. For example, we are starting a project here with an indigenous community, and we are handing them some VR equipment and 360 cameras that we expect to see again in 2 months. So it depends on the design of the study, but it would be nice in your study that you have a bunch of equipment that you can move from certain community to another, depending on the experiment that you want to deploy. And something about 1 month or 2 months, I think, is enough to have a very interesting longitudinal study.
Thank you. So we have it recorded, so we have your comments, but in the interest of time, unless Tabitha, you wanted to respond, I'm gonna. Yeah.
I was gonna say there's one more hand up.
Right.
And then Greg, do we have time for that?
Yeah, we're okay.
Great.
Really fast. I think like once we're thinking of like sending equipment on, we need to think of how to avoid legacy equipment. For example, right now I think the Quest one is already like obsolete. So if you give like these communities this equipment, how long will that equipment be usable? Because if you give something and it's only for like next 2 years, maybe say, oh, this is such a big investment that is not worth for us. So I think it's something to consider both for the community and for like the developers. Like because if we end like in the mobile space where it's like 3,000 different types of mobile phones and developing for it is like super difficult. Like how can we like standardize that? I think just those were my 2 comments.
Thank you. Rob, you're up.
So first, I think this is a really great idea. I think it's a really great opportunity. So kudos for leading the effort. I think it's really great. It's also nice to have a diverse group leading the effort. So that's really good too. My thought was around getting some of the larger organizations to donate in a tax incentive way, to donate equipment, donate things that will be used specifically to improve the diversity and inclusion in these sorts of studies. It just hit me that might, you probably already thought of it, but I thought that might be a good way to balance the need for more resources and the needs of the community to get better diversity.
I love it. Can I respond to that also? Thanks, Rob. And it's tied to Myra, I think, the previous question about equipment getting old, essentially, or obsolete. And I think in everything we do here, there's a tendency for all of us to just strive for the perfect, but there is no perfect here. Whatever choice we make has some downsides and upsides. And so we're just trying to, balance those out. So Rob's point about getting something donated, it's probably not the latest, greatest. It might be, but it might be older. But I personally, this is my own personal opinion, I think if we're stuck in a place where that matters so much, then we're probably thinking about it in the wrong way. So I think if we can identify the space of things that are less sensitive to that and may still be useful. By the way, none of this means that researchers wouldn't continue to do all the research they normally do, right? All of us would continue to run lab studies. We do whatever we would normally do. It just means that this is an additional tool available to all of us to use for when it's appropriate.
Mohammed?
Yeah, thank you. So before I say anything, I just wanted to point out that I'm a newcomer to this community. It's my first time attending IEEE VERA. I'm actually from the computer architecture community, and we're now looking at XR as a driving domain. And so my comment was about point 3, so both the cost and then also things becoming obsolete. So I've been working on a project called ILXR, Illinois Extended Reality Testbed. You can find out more at illixr.org. It's actually an already funded NSF community infrastructure grant. So we got $1 million to build this thing. And it's basically an open source XR runtime. So it's exactly what Oculus VR would do or Windows Mixed Reality would do. So it would give you hand tracking and visual post-processing and ambisonic audio and all of that jazz, but completely open source and completely free. So I was thinking, so of course, right, it's not as polished as real products, but like I said, it's already funded as a grant, so we're going to be building. So if we can get support from this community and build that out, at least minimally, the software cost will go away. And number 2, because it's a grant and it has to evolve over some number of years, there's a less chance of it becoming obsolete, right? Because we're still adding features, and in a few years, we'll have more features and people can remain up to date. There's still the question of hardware cost that I agree still has to be solved, but there are projects like North Star, which is an open source AR headset that you can 3D print. So of course, it's maybe cheap in the US, maybe not so in certain parts of Africa or Asia. But my point being that there are now these open source things that we can choose instead of Oculus or HoloLens that can help run these studies.
By the way, Mohammed, you just reminded me, thank you, and welcome, by the way. The cost of this to researchers, I maybe didn't say this, for the period of the grant, our vision is that it would be free. So we have to be careful about this, right? So it's not, as I've said to other people, we can't have it be the all-you-can-eat buffet. We have to think about how we protect the resource so that everyone can use it. But just to be clear, the cost to individuals using it, the idea is that it would be free for the period of the grant.
Right, right.
Thank you. And I think, Pablo, you might have one of the last comments here.
Oh, I'm sorry for that, because it's a very good panel. I don't want to be the last. Well, for the sake of diversity, I'm pretty sure that all of you have a very good intention in this project, but there is the risk of broadening the digital divide between countries and the digital divide between researchers in different places. So I understand the rules of NSF, and there are several things that you have to pay attention to. But please try to encourage collaboration between researchers in different countries, because it would be really sad if you get really nice papers with 150 subjects and the rest of us can only afford 10.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And again, this is one of the points that got cut in the interest of shortening things. Pablo, thank you. But we completely get it. We're trying to balance doing everything we can do to both get funded and do it right and obey by the rules. Having said that, we said earlier, and we'll say at the previous session, we'll say it again. If anybody, Pablo, anybody in Europe or Asia or anywhere in the world wanted to start up a satellite, if you will, of VERA, and imagining that we had something worthwhile to share, we would share everything and we would try to figure out how to make it work. It just literally means, I believe, we cannot send US dollars to outside the US. It's just the way it is. But that doesn't mean we can't work together with those people. All of the work really is kind of on our own time, so mostly. So would love to do that if anybody else wanted to pick up that heavy load and work on it there.
Greg, I wanted to follow up kind of on that and what Pablo said. So it's an NSF grant for 4 years and it's supposed to be self-sustaining after that. So do the rules hold after those 4 years? If it's self-sustaining, does it have to be restricted to US at that point?
I'm sure NSF doesn't care at that point. That's the whole idea. However it's being sustained, it would be up to those individuals or that machine. If it's a private company, it would be up to them. If it's an international organization, it would be up to them.
So these rules are only just for while it's getting to the point of self-sustain.
Yes, Bill, thank you. And more specifically, these rules are only applied to the dollars that came from the National Science Foundation. It doesn't apply to our time or our efforts or our brains and everything we would be doing. It just simply means that the money has to be spent, and we're not exactly sure. You know, we have tried to get answers to some of these questions, and we're doing our best, but we're not getting great answers. Some of them are hard questions to ask because we don't know exactly what we're asking. It's hard to know. By the way, I wanted to comment on something, the diversity thing. Someone else, a bunch of people have made comments about, you know, reaching out to underrepresented communities and things like that. Something that would be really valuable to us, in addition to ideas for the communities, would be ideas for, or better than an idea, would be knowledge about how to access those communities. So if anybody has, you know, out of band later can give us ideas or concrete mechanisms for how to reach some of those communities, that would be really helpful. Some of them we obviously know, but we'll take all suggestions and ideas.
All right, we have 1 minute, so we have a last hand raised, and then we'll have to go on to the next topic. Gundren? I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, if I still have time, what I've seen a lot in like colleagues of mine talking about medical research, I realize it's a huge issue where the data is being stored and who has access to it, in which way, property rights. If you could do something along the lines of open software here for open data, I mean, this is yet another issue, but it would be really important. Also, when you do an ethical approval, they will ask where is the data stored, in which way, anonymized and whatever. So that could be a real hindrance if that data cannot be like somehow not be used properly. We know this from tracking also. We want to have these reusable tracking data sets. Just a wishful thinking from my side.
Oh no, Gudrun, you're so right. God, these are great comments. So real quickly to that point, we don't know all the answers, as I said before, but it's kind of our current thinking. It seems that it's falling out that the participant pool, IRB governing, if you will, and it's not governing as in legal, but just we need to put things in places that the UCF's Institutional Review Board would help monitor the subject pool, and the data storage would likely be done at UCF. The individual researchers all over the country, all over the world, would work with their own IRBs to get their specific study approved. The data, if it was stored in a central place, like say here at our university, which we have resources and ways to do that, we would probably try and follow, we're thinking a model like PSA does and others do, which is where essentially the data is embargoed for a while the researchers who solicited that data, who ran the experiment, have access to it and can do what they need to do. But then at some point it would be made available to the wider community. That would be part of the bargain. Everybody who participates, there's going to be some bargain. It's not just a resource for everybody to use to their own advantage. But great comments, Gudrun. Thank you, and congratulations, by the way. Yesterday.
So I think we're going to go ahead and move on to the next topic. And thank you, everyone, for all of your comments. Please keep them coming.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. So context for this next topic, which Dr. Nahal Nuruzi will lead the discussion on. Context is that, as I mentioned earlier, the all-you-can-eat buffet, right? So we have a finite amount of resources: the money, the people, the subjects, the time, everything. And so part of this is we have to be, careful how we use that. Not only so we don't lose money or waste the money, but that we preserve the money for other people who are going to do studies in the future. So the next person that comes along and submits a study, we're not out of money or out of resources. So Nahal, please.
Thank you, Greg. So hi, everyone. So part of the reason we started even thinking about a review process, and of course wanted to get your thoughts on it, is that if Greg, you move to the next animation, if VERA gets funded, of course we can have access to a large and diverse sample, which is going to be wonderful. But if you move forward, imagine that I'm that yellow character, and I'm gonna, one day come and say, hey, community, I'm going to use this amazing resource to run this study that I'm very interested in, and it's going to use 70% of VERA's yearly resources. And of course, this is a relatively extreme example, but to make the point that we realize some of these situations may happen, that, for instance, my study is so massive that it's going to take the resource. Or another example is that I'm going to keep submitting, for instance, study ideas, or let's call them study proposals to VERA, and then basically consume all of the resource. And the reason it's a problem is because it's a resource for the whole community. And I think when we think about it, I think, again, some potential reactions to something like this happening can be that, of course, because it's a resource for the community, someone might say, okay, it's not fair. Or another reaction can be, back to Pablo's point about collaboration, is that if this is such an important fundamental study, well, does it even make sense for one researcher or one team to lead this? And wouldn't it be better if, for instance, a larger group of people collaborate together to run studies like that? So because of that, because of potential issues like this that can arise, we really wanted to, Greg, you move to our next point, we really wanted to have communities' involvement and guidance as much as possible to make sure that VERA is shaped towards something that people want to use and it aligns with their needs, which brings us to, I guess, one of the most important questions. So before getting to that question, I want to ask everyone to imagine themselves in two mindsets at the same time. The first mindset would be that, let's imagine VERA is funded and people, researchers are going to submit study proposals to VERA to avoid issues like, one researcher consuming all the resource. The other perspective, second perspective, is imagine yourself in the shoes of board members and reviewers who are going to receive these incoming study proposals. Based on that, a larger question. So the third point is going to be all of us together trying to understand what are some characteristics that can both help the authors, the researchers who are submitting proposals, and also the reviewers to be able to evaluate the studies that are submitted to VERA and say, okay, this may not be appropriate, this needs to be modified, and another study is appropriate. And our goal is to do this in an objective, inclusive, and fast way. Again, so not one person is consuming all the resource. We have been thinking about some ideas based on, again, other groups such as PSA. And before moving to any of those examples, I want to pause for a second. If anyone has feedback in general about the review process or something like a review process being in place, and if they have any ideas about, for instance, the third question. So feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or thoughts. Okay, I'm seeing a comment by Florian. The review overhead is crazy. That is correct.
Just sorry, real quick on that, Florian, it's a good point. Again, like everything, we don't have the answer, but current thinking is that the board members who are making these decisions, there's a people part and a systems part. The people part would be that those board members are rotating, but they're there for a little while, and that it would be something that would be prestigious and would mean something. So rather than just saying I was a reviewer for IEEE VR, it would be that I was a board member or something, something that was helpful to people professionally and recognized or acknowledged the effort that would go into this. The systems part is to try and design the review system so that it could be as lightweight as possible. And remember, we're going to have full-time paid staff. So the full-time paid staff will hopefully be reviewing a lot of the mechanics and making sure that things are technically okay as far as the system goes. And the reviewers will solely be focusing on sort of the science or the appropriateness.
Thank you, Greg. So I think one point is to, I guess your comments are absolutely correct. It's going to be extra in the sense of more work in some sense. But at the same time, we are concerned that if we don't have a process like that, it may be the case that it would be difficult to say it's a resource for the community because it may happen that all of the community may not be able to effectively use it. So we have some ideas, for instance, as you can see in the examples, and these are just ideas that we were thinking may help kind of like streamlining this process and reduce the load on reviewers or board members. As an example of, like, again, example characteristics, we were thinking that if someone's submitting a proposal to VERA, they can have things like effect size estimates, or make sure that they really motivate how having access to a large and diverse N is going to impact their findings and help them answer their research questions. So I'm going to pause. Pablo, floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I guess there will be many people in the community interested, but sometimes at the beginning, the problem is to get projects, to get all the machinery working. So I wonder if it's possible to, in advance, thinking stages for these rules. Let's say a first stage would be 6 months or something, in which every project could be interesting, depending on the metrics that this system will have to fulfill. I'm pretty sure your staff will have to be measured by certain type of metrics or KPIs. So in that case, you will have to respond for those things. For example, you have to address people from different parts of the US, or you have to, I don't know, address a certain amount of subjects. So at the beginning, you will have something that is very, very relaxed. And according to the data that you get from your system in that time, you can start creating the rules for the other stages. Because it's very difficult to create a new process of reviewing, knowing that the people who will review will the same people that are very burdened with reviews at this time.
Pablo, that is a great point. Greg, do you want to?
No, I had a comment, but finish your comment, please.
No, I just want to say that is a great point, and something I think Greg also mentioned at some point during the talk, that VERA in some sense is a prototype. So I really like your idea of a relaxed approach and kind of like a piloting phase, because we want to really know how to make VERA work, technical aspects even. So having, I guess, a more relaxed approach and try our best an inclusive approach to get those studies in trying to understand what sort of results people are getting. I like your idea about that, and then developing, for lack of a better word, the rules in some sense.
Yeah, I love it. So yeah, Pablo, so our goal right now is to get funded. So that's with the proposals due in June. And so for that, one of the primary things we need to convince the reviewers and NSF and ourselves is that the community actually cares about this, that they're interested, that they want to see it happen. The details about how we do a lot of those things, I mean, we don't really have any idea how utilized this would be. We have no idea. I mean, we can guess. While we have to be prepared, and we have to tell the National Science Foundation and the reviewers that we have thought this through, and we're aware of the potential pitfalls, and we're aware of the need to be able to have policies and things like that. I think all of the organizers, our tendency is to err on the side of not over constraining things to begin with. It's kind of in the spirit of what you're saying, to keep things as simple as possible and see how it goes. If it becomes overwhelming, we get flooded with too many things and they're just inappropriate, or there's a problem, then we can react to that and adapt, like Nahal was saying. It's a prototype. We'll evolve it as time goes on. But in the spirit, absolutely.
But for what you said, that the NSF noticed that people care, you can have some type of pre-registration of projects that will be interested in running in this setup. So you can find the list of people who will be interested in starting, and from there maybe you can identify, and maybe that's some work that you have to do extra right now to identify which ones are the ones that will start running in your facilities.
You're making me laugh, because the last discussion topic, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, is Jeremy Bailenson is going to lead. Professor Jeremy Bailenson. It's about we call the top 10 list, but it's identifying some really compelling studies that could be carried out. We can't, as I said earlier, I think we cannot put people's names in the proposal. I mean, there isn't space generally, and we're not allowed to. They actually prohibit that for maybe obvious reasons. But yes, wonderful idea, absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, Pablo, that's a great idea. And again, some of the, I know Greg at some point mentioned about the small, medium, and large, and this is something I wanted to share and get everyone's thoughts, because of course, large and diverse N is amazing, and we can, as Gerd also mentioned, we can go and look into those more subtle effects using that. But we were also thinking that we may not want to, and again, this should be based on community's feedback, we may not want to limit the nature of studies that go through VERA to just massive studies. And maybe, for instance, if someone wants to run a study with older adults and they just want to do a qualitative study, they may need 30 people. In that case, we would like to have different tracks to accommodate, for instance, people who want to run smaller studies, kind of like something that NSF does. So that's another thing that I wanted to share to get everyone thinking and see if that makes sense.
I see a question from Vicky, which is a great question. Could you maybe start with a lower barrier to entry? I mean, I think you guys can see the question. And the answer is yes, we're thinking about things like that. We're trying to think about ways to regulate. But again, we're trying hard to not institute the most constraining, most restrictive things to begin with as best we can. We'd rather be overwhelmed. I mean, we should only be so lucky that we're getting overwhelmed with requests from the community, and then we have to react and fix things. But yes, that sort of thing that Vicky's saying is something we're thinking about. By the way, large here, to calibrate you a little bit, I mean, Nahal, you know more, but it's like PSA, that I mentioned earlier, is probably a very relevant model that we're looking at. They'll do studies that are what? How many thousands, Nahal? What would be?
51,000 was one of their most recent studies.
There you go. So just a few. But they take many, many months of review and committees, and it's all volunteer, by the way. PSA is all volunteer. There is no NSF pouring money into that organization. It's all volunteers from around the world. It's international. And but they take a long time to approve and put in place those huge studies. So that's why we recognize that, Nahal has here the small, medium, large. Those larges may take longer because there might be 20, 30, 40 researchers, 40 of you guys, 50, I don't know. There are PSA, there are papers that have 100 researchers on them. They exist, people who together wanted to study something big. So something that big may, would likely, take more time to consider and get right. I think everybody would agree, because also the impact of getting it wrong is much higher, right? I mean, you could do pilots, you could run smaller subsets of the studies and progressively try and get it right. But I want to try and get it right. So this is, again, we're not going to get all the, I think I may have said this, but we're not going to get all the answers to everything here. But these are 3 topics, and we're going to move on to the last topic now. But these 3 topics, the diversity opportunities, the proposal review process and criteria and things like that, and then the next topic Jeremy's going to lead. Those are just 3 things that we think are important. Maybe the most important at the moment, but certainly the most useful to discuss with you guys. So send ideas, call, email, DM, whatever you want to do to reach out to us later if you want to talk about these things. But let's transition to Jeremy. Is that all right, Jeremy? I think I see you there. Yes.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, everyone, for the great comments and the great ideas. And so for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to get to talk to you about, well, what would we actually do here? What are some of the studies? And I'm putting up a graph from a paper from about 10 years ago by Dylan Arena and Jesse Fox. And they went through back then all the literature that had ever used a headset and came up with a rough binning of 3 types of studies. VR or XR as an object, as an application, and as a method. And so an object, an example here would be Tabitha and her colleagues' work on embodiment. So the question is, when do you feel like that avatar is you, and how does one induce this self-presence into an avatar? And why I like that as an example for an object means you're studying VR is the thing you're studying. This is an example where scale really helps. You need to have different shaped bodies. You need to have different cultures. You need to have different use levels of VR, different experiences into the world. And as a basic question about how people use VR itself, embodiment. So these techniques that people have developed on how one induces body transfer, how people use an avatar as their home, is one where both the scale and the diversities of the sample would help. The next would be an application. Lots of these we talk about, common example being VR as a tool to reduce pain via distraction. It turns out that we need a lot of more research on different time scales. So the 30th time, is it the same as the 5th time, types of illness, etc. And so VR as an application to solve some hard problem. And then VR as a method. And this is the notion that VR is just a tool, the same way a computer that can measure reaction time is a tool to run a study. Someone mentioned tracking data. And so for those who care about, if your passion of question is how one moves their body and what that signals about their mind, and you care about that link of brain and body, VR is just a tool to you. This is an example of VR as a method. And so when we think about incoming proposals, we think about VR as an object. We're studying VR as a medium itself, VR as an application, where there's a really important world problem we want to use VR to help solve, and then VR as a method, which is, I have a theoretical question where VR is an important one to answer. And I was going to seed some examples, as Greg put it in a fun way, top 10, but I just got so enamored with the technique that Tabitha just did. I'd never seen that done on Zoom. So I want everyone, if you were to run your own study where you got to have a lot of subjects, look at them over time, you had a wonderfully diverse sample in terms of all the parameters we're talking about, put that in your head. We're not going to hit enter, type it into, please use Zoom. I'm not on Discord, so please use the Zoom chat for that. So type it into Zoom and get ready to enter it. And to repeat the question, you're putting in your first study and you are you get this nice sample, it gets run for you, it's all the things we talked about. I will pause and say, someone in the chat early on mentioned, well, how do you protect against intellectual property? Please don't put any secrets in the chat. If this is your best idea you've been hoarding for the last 10 years, this is not the time and place to release it. This is more if you've got a classic study, it could be IPD and how that affects simulator sickness. So I've been stalling long enough. Please hit enter on your chats, please, and we can all see what each other might be putting first. Simulator sickness and IPD, how to reduce the work of reviews and filters. Good. See, a lot of you are protecting your home run ideas. That is just fine. Anybody want to take over audio? Okay, Greg, back to you. Thank you, everyone. Wonderful to be here.
Let me stimulate just a little more before we jump off that. I don't know, I can't tell, there's so many people here. It's great. Ed Swan here. So if you guys have been part of his workshops in the past about the replicability crisis and studies, one of the things we've wondered about, we're hoping to get ideas from you guys, is are there studies that have happened in the past at VR ISMAR, one of the XR journal or conference, that seem to have been very impactful, but when we look back in retrospect, we wonder whether the population was relatively narrow for that, and whether we would all be better off by looking at those questions with the broader population. So what are sort of that, I joked about the top 10 list, the sort of ideas for studies that Jeremy's trying to get you guys to offer up, that were things that both would be really impactful and couldn't, in air quotes, just it wouldn't be practical to do them today or go back and do them without a resource like this. And just
one thing that we've been working on here in the lab is networking large groups together. So one thing where VERA, I think, can contribute a lot to the world is we often look at dyads or triads, but if you're trying to look quantitatively at large groups, you need to have sample, and you need to have sample who can use it for a long time. So to me, an utter home run is just this question of, Rob just put this long-term immersion. I really think that's something that has been underserved in the history of VR research, and in addition to the participant diversity, just diversity of the types of experience we can give is going to be an important one.
Yeah, and Pablo's, I mean, I think this is one of these things where the floodgates, I hope, will open as people start to see examples. Because for me, it's hard to think of something, and then when I see other people's thoughts, I go, oh, yeah, that's an interesting line of thinking. So, Pablo is highlighting the certain number of uses given several apps. So remember, this is the possibility to do things over time with potentially even the same subjects or different subjects, or for long periods of time, to Rob's point.
I mean, on the notion of individual differences within a sample, Greg, your question about which ones can get better, respectfully, I think is the wrong question, because there's so few VR experiments that have had the ability to travel via something like Mechanical Turk or Prolific, that we're just starting to be able to do this. So to me, it's less, is there a single study you think that needs it, and more, this will be the norm eventually, and we're just going to get a bit of a head start on it.
Yeah, no offense taken. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, so everybody, you shouldn't limit to past studies. I'm just trying to get people to think broadly. It could be, what is a burning, and this is what people are suggesting, which is great, like burning questions that are appropriate for, that are matched to this sort of a resource. I'm trying to understand the question. I don't know where this fits. Cultural impact of XR in our social values, cultural concepts. Dogstool, Rob. Yeah. Is Andres there who could verbally explain a little bit the question?
I have a similar concern that maybe I can explain.
Please. Yeah.
I'm trying to do some work on empathy with the indigenous people, and the first thing that I have to do is to explain VR, and I'm bringing some quests to a certain region in the country. But the first problem that I will have to address is how they approach technology. They don't like, for example, wind. Getting energy from these wind big mills, for example. I don't know why, but I will have to understand. And probably I have to see how they approach VR. And it's possible that for certain people, it will be something that is not interesting, or they don't want to wear it, or they don't want to use it. And those positions could be related to their way of view of life, and I don't know how to address those issues. So probably that is related to what Andres is thinking. And in that case, I don't know, we will have to find ways to show these people the advantages of using new technologies and becoming one with everybody that knows that this technology is there and probably is useful for our civilization, hopefully.
It's not exactly related to what you just said, but you made me think about John Quarles had a talk yesterday, and it was about, the title was something about wheelchair interface. And I had thought it was one thing when it was going into the talk, that it was about like just an interface for people in wheelchairs, something like that. And what I realized quickly as he started to give the talk was there was a large part, and I'm not going to characterize it properly, so I apologize to John publicly, but that it was people's reactions to or perception or influenced by seeing those other people. So cultural things or other diversity related things, there really could be a lot done on a large scale for that. Jeremy.
Oh.
Yeah, so I see a question from Mary Whitten in the chat. Thank you, Mary. So how does the type of a question affect the populations? And I think that's exactly the right question and why we need to think about this case by case. I mean, the advantage I think that Pablo just brought up, which is you have a population that doesn't even want to touch a phone. How do you put goggles on them? That's a different type of a process than you go through where if you're trying to, Greg mentioned earlier replication. And to me, one of my inspirations from this project, there's a great paper written by Jim Blascovich in 2002 that outlines how VR is going to transform the nature of experimentation. And so if you go into the application realm and you think about something like VR for pain reduction, that's something you need some scale there, right? This is a medical device and, you're at this point and you need to figure out, well, we need to know the answer with a capital A because we're about to use this instead of pharmaceuticals. And so I think there's some parts where scale is more important and there's some parts where, care and qualitative work before quantitative work is more important. And, this is there's not a kind of if-then formula. It's just kind of a useful framework to think about the types of questions we can ask.
Oh, Andres, you wanted to explain his suggestion a little bit, please.
Yeah, it's similar to Pablo, but a little bit different. It's not about other cultures. It's very interesting how we have some ideas and how different it is with other cultures. But also our own culture is changing. What we see as real, what we see as plausible, what we see as values about veracity, plausibility are changing and are changing also in the youth. And school childs using AR and it dissolves the relationship with physical reality. For example, I mean, that kind of impact also the impact on our own lives, not only on the other ones, which is really interesting, other mindsets, which Pablo mentioned, or our own mindset, values and emotionally is changing. And technology always has made this change, but the actual development of technology is very fast and very diverse. So I think that's also interesting.
Okay, we've got Jacob, I see you got your hand up. Hang on one second, though. I wanted to address Saab's question. I think I'm going to try a little bit, which is, yeah, for sure, definitely. And we keep mentioning PSA as a good model or a good reference for us. They're not doing exactly what we're thinking about, but it's very related. And they are volunteer research labs from around the world. So they will tell you, and it's a great thing, that they're cover the entire world. It's like 40 countries or 45 or 50 countries. I mean, it's pretty amazing in terms of these huge quantities. However, so it's broad internationally or culturally, but as far as we can tell, and we're trying to find this out some more, there's still research labs that are running the studies. And so they're probably subjects that are coming from the university communities at all of these diverse places mostly. So they're still narrow in that sense, even though they're broad in terms of the location of the world. So there is no perfect here, but yeah, that sort of in the wild kind of point is interesting. I'm gonna try and see your talk, by the way. Thank you, Saab. So Jacob had his hand up. Jacob.
Hi. Just some more unstructured thoughts around, I guess, Mary's comments. And I think one of the good things this would give is if you've got a diverse population, you can test things out on, even if it is just methods or objects or something like that. I think being able to get people's different opinions on those kind of things is, I think, extremely valuable if you want your methods and your objects to be available to large populations. So I wasn't involved in the study, but there was a project in my old lab recently where Noel Park actually, I think it's in the chat, but so they wanted to make a virtual experience for Māori people who wanted to be able to share their stories with people, and they had busts of people telling their stories. So it was just a head on a pedestal, essentially. They're kind of modeling it off some Greek process or something. I'm not sure where it came from. They thought it'd be a good way to do this, and then they actually showed it to these Māori people, and they were horrified because showing any kind of disembodied head is a huge cultural taboo. So I think if you want your if you want your methods to be available to everyone, I think you need to be able to gather everyone's opinions on it to see if it's actually going to be valuable for them, or whether it's, yeah, hopefully that makes some kind of sense.
No, it kind of doesn't. You just made me think, Jacob, that, and Mary, I see your question. So we talked about like Prolific has 8,000 people with HMDs right now, so they say. But I didn't even look to see, I don't know if Gerd or Tabitha, anybody else would remember, if you took off the HMD constraint, I mean, there might be 30,000, so it's a very large number. And so they're not perfect, and we're not saying that we're only going to use Prolific, but just for the sake of discussion, imagine them. We could actually do the complement. So we could actually send out, if it's a VR related study, why couldn't we send out a survey to the population that doesn't have HMDs or has some other, cultural characteristic within our pool. So whether it's Prolific or the other people, it doesn't have to be an HMD experience. It could just be questions. It could be showing pictures, could be showing video to get their feedback. And studies could have a progression of things. It could start out with something simple like that to help inform the researchers for the real study that they want to do next. That's all possible. Gerd, do you see Mary's question, and do you have a comment on that?
I'd replied directly to her that I thought that Nahal's slide on small, medium, and large really kind of sums up how we view the pilot in that small bucket.
Okay. So we're at our closing time now, and I do not want to go over. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and again, encourage you to send us questions or comments. Happy to talk on the phone, Zoom, whatever. And we're going to, capture all of the things that were said. I'm looking at the chat, and Jacob has his hand up because Jacob's our taskmaster. So what's up, Jacob?
Sorry, I just forgot to put it back down.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, so I think we should let people go on to the next session, so we're not hogging the time or resources. But thank you again, everybody. And we look forward to our next session, which will be in April, and we'll send notes out for that to get people to hopefully join us again. And maybe we'll even make it longer for people to allow people to come and go a little more. That's great. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Greg. Nice work.
Thanks, everybody, for all the hard work.
Thank you for attending and participating.
Thank you. And I saved the chat as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Sweet.
Good luck with the proposal.
Thank you, Pablo. I will say this is probably more work than I put in any proposal in my life so far, and I've been involved in some big ones. This is
no kidding. Coming from you, this is really huge then. Good luck then.
Thank you. I think.
Okay.
Thanks, Pablo.
Have fun. Have fun.